Welcome. This is a great conference that Tobias puts on. Last year was great. Looks like this year's off to another great start. So howdy, I'm Jeffrey Snover. I'm a Microsoft Technical Fellow, and today I'm going to talk to you about PowerShell, sort of the state of where we are, state of the union. So a couple weeks ago, we had a PowerShell Summit in the US, and I had an Ask Me Anything session for 2 hours. I didn't realize I was getting into it for 2 hours. Anyway, there were a lot of questions like this, right? Hey, if we were to write Monad Manifesto today, what would it say? Or what's the next big thing for PowerShell? What does the PowerShell reorganization mean? And then also, hey, are we at the end of PowerShell? And so I started to think about these questions, and what I realized was behind all of these was one core question. Is PowerShell done? And so I started to think about that, and the answer is yes and no. I'm an architect, I get to do those things. So if you take a look, has anyone ever read the Monad Manifesto? Okay, so yay. Those of you who haven't, it's an interesting document. You'll see it was written in, let's see, do we have a laser pointer here? 2002. Turns out that was version 1.2. The original document was written in 2001, but it had the command syntax as VMS DCL command syntax. So I updated it with the new, more Unixy command syntax. Anyway, so it's a stunning document because it really lays out what it was we were going to achieve and how we were going to achieve it, and it's provided outstanding clarity and about what we were going to do. Anyway, in it, we articulated this model of the Monad automation model, right? We said, hey, we think automation's being done the wrong way. We think we can improve it. We talked about the Monad shell, right? A .NET-based execution script environment exposing these commandlets as APIs, command line tools, and an interactive programmable shell. So both an interactive shell and a scripting language, although kudos to Jim Truer and Bruce Payette, the language that they produced was really over 10 times as powerful as I had ever hoped for. They just really knocked it out of the park with that. Then I talked about the idea of monad management models, which is to say a well-defined way for everyone to solve a single problem the same way, and then remote scripting, and then a management console. Okay, so those are the basic things we set out to achieve with Monad. So let's see how we've done. So first, the automation model. Right now, you can write, the heart of the automation model was to say that we want people who have something to be managed to be able to have a highly productive way to manage it. In particular, that they write the code that they and only they can write, and we do all the rest, right? So someone writes a small piece of code to manage a disk, we do the parsing. We do the formatting, we do the output to HTML, we do the conversion to JSON, etc. They don't write any of that code. And now you can write those commandlets in .NET, you can write them in PowerShell itself, you can write them native code using WMI, you can use workflows, and we're about to do something called Swagger. Swagger is an annotation layer on REST APIs, and will auto-generate commandlets from a REST API. Crazy exciting, right? So we're using this for Azure. All the Azure APIs are using Swagger, so we'll be able to auto-generate commandlets from it. We showed this to our friends at VMware. They were wildly excited, okay? So this is gonna be a big deal. Anyway, so in this area, boy, it's pretty easy to take your management stuff and expose it as commandlets and do everything else. So here I think we're doing great. In the shell, we have PowerShell.exe, the interactive shell. You know, it has a number of deficiencies. Turns out most of those deficiencies have to do with the console itself, not PowerShell itself. And so Windows has been improving that with their console work. I don't know if you've seen that, but they recently added 24-bit color. The speed's getting faster. Those guys have finally, after, what, 15, 20 years of non-investment have started to invest. And you know, when the Windows engineering system gets turned on, it is an incredible force. So they're doing really good work there. Of course, we have PowerShell ISE, the integrated scripting environment, graphical debugging, graphical editing, scripting support, snippets, etc. Great environment there. PowerShell Readline. PowerShell Readline now provides some great interactive IntelliSense to the command line interface. We have Visual Studio support. We have Visual Studio Code support. Anybody using Visual Studio Code? Yeah, pretty awesome stuff. Right? And then we're producing something called the Cloud Console. So if anyone uses Azure, shortly you'll see a little button in Azure that when you click on it, you'll get an interactive shell in your browser, and you'll be able to choose between a bash shell and PowerShell. Okay? So in terms of those interactive hosts, doing pretty darn well. Now in terms of the scripting language itself, from the very beginning we supported sort of ad hoc scripting to very advanced scripting. The advanced scripting has gotten more and more and more advanced. In PowerShell version 5, we even support classes and interfaces. So that's going really quite well. PowerShell Script Analyzer now provides sort of lint-like capabilities. We have the PowerShell Gallery for you to take your artifacts and share them with others, find artifacts from others and just use them. We've integrated with anti-malware and security. Boy, we just knocked it out of the park with security. In fact, I heard a disappointing thing the other day. I heard that Microsoft, we have internal red teams and blue teams. Apparently the red teams have started to move away from PowerShell and for writing their tools. And I was really quite disappointed about that until I found out that basically they had decided, yeah, it's too easy to get caught if they use PowerShell. So they're shifting away to other tools where it's less easy to get caught. So doing great there. In terms of remoting, right? Remoting, PowerShell Remote Protocol. That works over WSMan, that's WinRM protocol. It works locally over name pipes. It uses the VM bus. Anybody using that? So now you can go directly, yeah? You can go directly from a host into a VM, right? Say new PowerShell session VM name, and it goes over the VM bus. And that's really cool. A great demo there is to like remove all the NICs, and you can still remote into it. It's totally fun. Anyway, so then we're adding OpenSSH support to that. We have remote debugging, which we just added. Hopefully somebody will be debugging that, or showing that, where you can say F11 into a remote machine on an invoke command. Crazy powerful stuff. In terms of management models, of course, we've had a common way to interact with namespaces, okay? You can CD into the file system, you can CD into the WSMan drive, you can CD into the registry, etc. Turned out that writing those things was kind of hard. Writing a namespace provider is hard, so we're in the process of making it easier with a technology called SHIP. This is based upon some of the community work Jim Christopher had written. I forget what his was called. Simplex. And so we've taken the great stuff of that, and then extended it with a model we call SHIP. And I think that stands for Simple Hierarchical Something Provider. I provider. And it's really, when you talk about this, it's really super important that you enunciate the P. SHIP. Otherwise, you can be confused. Anyway, we're not shipping, we're shipping SHIP, not anything else. We've had, of course, a common way to deal with jobs and interactive, things that are going to take a long way. We now support GIA, which is a common way to do security and provide people with no admin privileges access to admin privilege tasks. We have ps-get, pester, desired state configuration, lots of great stuff there. And then in terms of the management console, frankly, it's been a little bit weaker. Exchange, GUIs, all based upon PowerShell. Server Manager, ditto, uses PowerShell. Power GUI, Show UI, and then David Wilson's going to be talking about Phosphor in one of his talks. Okay, so when you map what we sought to achieve in the Monad Manifesto, and you take a look at where we are, to the question, is PowerShell done? The answer is yeah. We really have achieved critical mass for all the things that we set out to achieve. But it's done as a general purpose Windows scripting tool. Okay? Yes, there's more to do. Yes, there's a long tail of things to do. But really, as a general purpose Windows scripting tool, we really have achieved critical mass. But really, the cloud changes everything. The cloud changes what problems that you have, the approach you take to it. The cloud changes everything. And so we have a new approach to PowerShell, a new mission for PowerShell. The mission for PowerShell is to be the connector of the hybrid cloud. Concretely, that you can, from any client, be able to manage any server, Windows, Linux, any server you're interested in, running in any cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, or on premises, using any hypervisor, Hyper-V, VMware, using any storage stack or any networking stack, right? The single tool that allows you to manage your entire estate. That is a very different mission, and we are not done on that. We are just starting our journey on that. So, is PowerShell done? The answer is no, not at all, my friends, not at all. We are changing our mission from being pure Windows-focused to being a cross-platform tool. We're shifting our focus from being a mere platform to focusing in on solutions and solving particular problems in a general way that you can take and extend. And we're shifting our focus from managing a particular server or set of servers to being able to manage services, applications, and clouds. So now let's step back and kind of, like I say, take an architect's point of view. And one of the benefits of being an architect is, you know, you solve these problems, but you try and solve them in a way that sets things up for the future, right? So as I take a look at this challenge of, hey, is PowerShell done? It really comes to this. At various points, you will get to a point where you've achieved your critical mass, achieved success, and you have this challenge. What do I do? And with that, there are two paths. One is to pursue the path of incremental change, and the other is to pursue a path of transformative change. Incremental change basically says, I'm either at the high water mark, or I can see the high water mark coming within the next time period, and then I'm just going to manage that to decline, right? Reduce my investment, ride on my coattails, just kind of ride that out. Transformative change says, hey, I'm here, I'm going to embark on something new and bold. And these are two very different types of change. They're completely different, okay? It's important not to confuse them. With incremental change, basically, you know what the answer is, and you just need to implement it, right? Addressing that long tail. Oh, I need a command that does this. The command that does this needs an extra parameter. I should support the next version of Windows. All things that you know how to do, you just need to execute it. Transformative change is hard because you don't know what the answer is. And sometimes you're not even sure what the question is. Like, that's a great vision, but what does that actually translate to in terms of like the next things you're going to go do in the next 6 months? That's a hard question. With incremental change, really you just need to sharpen your thinking. But with transformative change, you need to change the way you think about things. You need to change your value system. You need to understand what's important and what's not important, right? So you got to change the way you think. With incremental change, the answer is you're going to be successful. You have a high probability of success. With a transformative change, you are guaranteed you are going to fail by definition, because you don't know what the playbook is. You're not sure you know what the right questions to ask. You certainly don't know what the right answers are. So you are going to have failures, okay? And with incremental change, your customers and who you think of yourself stays the same. It doesn't change. But with a transformative change, all of a sudden, who you think of yourself as, what your mission is, and who your customers are changes, okay? And then lastly, with an incremental change, largely the team stays intact. But with transformative change, not everybody makes it. Not everybody makes it. You lose people. And why do you lose people? I mean, look at the things. You're you're going to have failures. You have a group of people that know how to be successful. They know what they are. They talk to their customers. They know what their customers want. They just want to add those things. And now all of a sudden you're asking people, hey, let's embark on this new thing. Not really sure where we're going, not sure how to get there. We're going to fail. We're going to have to be successful and meet the needs of people we don't really know yet and don't know how to have a conversation with. And this is very uncomfortable stuff. And a lot of people are up for it. A lot of people aren't up for it. So you lose people in these transformative changes. These transformative changes are super, super hard, okay? And it is very easy to fail at a transformative change. Here's the prescription. You might want to write this down. If you want to fail at a transformative change, just treat it like an incremental change, okay? That's all you have to do. And so it's very important as you address this to understand, hey, the problem I have, am I just doing an incremental thing or am I trying to be transformative? Now let me give you an example. Why am I going on about this transformative change? And the answer is we all are dealing with transformative change, okay? So I wanted to highlight how it affects the PowerShell team, but now let's talk about how it affects all of us. Okay, but before that, excuse me, transformative change really requires what Satya Nadella keeps talking about as this growth mindset, right? In a growth mindset, it's all about things like, hey, opportunity is failure is an opportunity to grow, right? When you have a fixed mindset, anytime there's a failure, it's seen as like, oh, this big drama, this horrible thing, it's devastating. In a growth mindset, he's like, yeah, that's something that's not going to work. Let's keep on moving, right? Challenges help you grow, whereas in the traditional mindset, it's like, hey, I'm good at this and I don't want to invest, right? You probably work with those people, right? Anybody here work with someone resistant to learning automation? So you know what I'm talking about, right? They're just like, they're good at their thing, right? They invested, they got good at something, and they just want to ride that to the end of their careers, right? They're not interested in learning something new. It requires a growth mindset, okay? Again, I like to try new things versus I just want to stay with what I'm doing. So now let's talk about these examples of transformative change. Of course, we all know this one, right? Going from a pure Windows GUI to automation was a transformative change. That's a transformative change that many of you are through and are on to your next one. A number of you are still on the, in the midst of it, right? You have coworkers that are like, what are you talking about? If I can't do it with a GUI, why would I do it? Hey, I got Windows Server. Of course we're going to install the full GUI on Windows Server. I don't know if you've noticed the latest version of Server with a GUI includes Xbox services. It does, right? You might say, well, what the heck's that all about? And the answer is that we're very clear on Windows Server 2016, right? Enterprises should be doing things headless and through automation, and that we provide a version of Windows Server with a GUI for two scenarios. One is small businesses, right? I have a server, I walk up to it, I give it a hug, caress it a little bit, I use the mouse and I manage it, right? There, that person knows the desktop and they need the same experience because that's their only skill level. They're not going any farther. They're just there trying to manage their dentist office, right? That's for them. The second scenario is for remote desktop services, right? Remote desktop services, it's all about the GUI, right? So you want compatibility with the client. Anyway, so that's what that's there for. But a lot of you I know are still dealing with people that say, oh, but I got to put the GUI tools, the GUI management tools on every single server. So a lot of you are dealing with that adaptive change now. And I bet you can look in your environment and look and say, yeah, some of those people are not going to make it, right? In fact, there's a great story. Oh, it's true, right? Great story from the summit about a guy who had been learned PowerShell, loved it, and started doing lots of training, right? So he was off doing PowerShell Saturdays and PowerShell seminars and all this, and he never really understood where, he was like the only guy at work doing it. And he wasn't sure, like, hey, do they value me? Do they not value me? I'm sort of the odd duck, and he felt at risk. Anyway, so there had been a management change. There's a new manager comes in, and his manager invites him to his office. And he's like, oh, how's this conversation going to go? And his manager's like, well, I understand that you spend a lot of time teaching other companies how to use this thing PowerShell. It's like, uh-huh. He says, well, could you teach our guys? Because I don't think they're going to make it. It's like, oh, wow, big flip. Anyway, the point was that company was growing quite a bit, right? They were having their transformative changes. The management had concluded that the only way they could succeed was by automating everything, and that some people just weren't going to make it, okay? So that's one example of a transformative changes. But why this is such an exciting period in the industry, in fact, probably the most exciting and most confusing period of the industry, is because you have transformative changes happening everywhere. As a technologist, I take a look at the technology stack, from silicon to networking to storage, et cetera. There are revolutions going on at every single layer of the stack right now. In the past, things were relatively static, and every now and again you'd have some dramatic change in one area. You'd see that, you'd refactor it, pretty straightforward to refactor. In the technology stack, that's happening at every single layer, so dramatic change there. But also, there's this change from managing, teams shifting from managing their silo to managing their entire estate, right? People are no longer happy having the storage team and the networking team and the Windows operating system team and the Linux team. It's like, well, what happens if I decide I want more Windows and less Linux, or more Linux and less Windows? What does it mean? I have to fire people? Like, what? What? And then hire people? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So people want more, shift from managing silos to be able to manage everything. There's also a transformative change from traditional IT to DevOps. Anybody taking a shot at DevOps? Oh, okay, great. If you aren't, guess what? It's in your future. This is very important stuff. And those people who are will realize, hey, there's a challenge. I go to lots of DevOps conferences, and everyone's struggling with, hey, what does it really mean? What are the right questions to ask? How do I do this, etc. There is a transformative change from going on-premises to the cloud, right? It's a very different model. And again, Windows PowerShell to core PowerShell is a transformative change. Now here, just to set the kind of framework, there's Windows PowerShell and there's core PowerShell. Those are two different versions of PowerShell. Windows PowerShell is the version of PowerShell that uses the full .NET framework. It's the one you're all familiar with. Core PowerShell is the open source version using .NET Core, and it ships in Nano Server, okay? So there's a big change between those two. So core PowerShell is one of these transformative changes. So let's drill into some of the details. Again, the mission for core PowerShell is to be that connector for the cloud. Now notice what I said. I didn't say the mission for Windows PowerShell. I said the mission for core PowerShell is to be the connector of the hybrid cloud. It is the thing that's going to run on any client, right? The full .NET framework will not work on Windows. Only the .NET refactored .NET Core, sorry, will not work on Linux. Whoa. Jet lag must be kicking in. Okay. The full .NET framework will not work on Linux. The .NET Core will. That's its function. Its function is to go down, be the core capabilities that can work cross-platform, be open source, etc. PowerShell, the next version of it basically doubles the API set. So the first instance was small and pretty lean. There's only a set of things you could do for it. The next version grows extensively. Okay? So that's what that's based upon. So .NET PowerShell is based upon it. That's why it is the basis for our manage any client or any server. Again, running on any cloud, we got to be open. We got to be dramatically open. We've had good relationships. But for instance, let me talk about my friends at VMware. Friends at VMware said, hey, PowerShell's going great, man. It's fantastic, except I have this problem. I have this problem that a lot of my customers are using Linux. And so I have this first-class experience for Windows automation and sort of a second-class version for Linux. So that's a problem. And then internally, I got a bunch of teams who are like, well, hey, I don't want to have only a Windows solution. So by having PowerShell on both Windows and Linux solves both those problems for them. That's why they're very enthusiastic about it. Okay, again, in the cloud or on premises using any technology that you want to do. That is the mission. So I'll talk a little bit about how that has translated into some of the transformative changes that we are making. These have been very hard, very, very, very hard. Open sourcing PowerShell is way harder than you can possibly imagine. Part of that is that PowerShell was developed as a Windows component. Now, a Windows component, guess what? It's built to a Windows engineering system that is almost like embedded into the cement foundations of Building 28. You know, I mean, it is just, you can't imagine how embedded it is and how unique it is. And having to rip that out and put into a new source code control system, have a build that anyone can build, and then transform the test is an incredible amount of effort, which you have no visibility into and you got no benefit from, other than once it's open source, once you can build it, once you can test it, you get a benefit of it. But that transformation was just incredibly painful. And honestly, you know, the team would look at this and say, man, in order to do that, here's the list of features that I can't put into Windows PowerShell, and is it really worth doing that? Like, I don't think it is worth doing that. Let's not do that. Let's just increment on Windows PowerShell. And so that's why it's important to understand this distinction of when you're dealing with an incremental change versus when you must make a transformational change. Because it will give you the courage to say, you know what, you're right. You're right. We are not, in order to do this thing and really just get to where we are, but with a different technology, we're going to have to forego, you know, implementing all these features which we could easily add right now, but it's the right thing to do. Okay, that's hard. And so you got to know the only reason why you do that is to have a clarity about what you're trying to achieve and the courage to make that hard call. So we made that hard call. Setting up the community governance model and the process, again, really hard call. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, it's in GitHub, right? Now what? Can anybody change anything? Right? Or do we say, well, it's in GitHub, but we're not taking any of your changes? Or, well, it works as long as everybody agrees? Like, none of those things work. So you have to establish a governance model, right? What are the roles? What are the commitments? What's the processes? And so we did a lot of work talking to various teams about how they did their community process. Chef, by the way, super helpful, very helpful in that. So establishing all that stuff. Again, no features were added. To achieve this, no features were added. But now we have a process where we can all work together and we can all contribute to PowerShell. And then, as I mentioned to you, when we launched PowerShell in open source, we had launch partners of AWS and VMware. And Google followed on shortly behind that. They would have made it if we had given them a bit more time. Anyway, so this open source is being embraced by the community. So that's really quite a payoff. But open sourcing PowerShell was a transformative change. Core PowerShell running on Linux, again, a transformative change, right? Again, going on .NET Core, here's the thing. Going on .NET Core, you might have said, okay, well, Jeffrey said that .NET Core version 2 had twice as many APIs. One, why did they do that? And two, why didn't you just wait to do that? Well, first, the answer to the first one, why did they do that? Because when they came out with .NET Core version 1 and gave it to the world, most of the world said, what are you, crazy? I can't port to that thing. There's not enough APIs. Like most teams except for one, the PowerShell team, right? The PowerShell team did the heavy lifting, and it was heavy lifting. I mean, a huge amount of work for the team. The team did a journeyman job, just fantastic work to do the work required to be successful in .NET Core, and that's what allowed us to open source. Most other teams said, hey, that's too hard, I'm not doing it. And so now they've added those APIs to make it easier for the people less capable. Anyway, PowerShell team really did a fantastic job. Anyway, so, hey, that was really hard work. The cultural compatibility, but it enabled us to go to Linux. The cultural compatibility, this is something we've articulated a set of things that we need to do, and we continue to work on it, okay? So PowerShell, core PowerShell is different than Windows PowerShell, mostly in small ways, but some of them will be breaking changes. So let me give you some examples. This is not a breaking change, but in Linux, all Linux shells, you can just say command line and ampersand and at the end of the line and run it in the background. We're adding that to core PowerShell. In Linux, case sensitivity is a very big deal. PowerShell, as you know, tries to be case insensitive as much as possible. So we got to find the right challenge of, hey, when are we case sensitive versus when are we case insensitive? Globbing works very differently on Linux, and so we've had to change that. File encodings, aliases, as you know, we have aliases like ls and curl. That caused a bunch of consternation in the open source community as we brought that to Linux. So figuring out exactly how that's going to work across both environments has been a transformational change. And of course, support for OpenSSH. We're taking OpenSSH and embedding it into Windows remoting and really taking it to the heart. Now, as we ported to Linux, what was very important was that Linux not be seen as a second-class citizen. I knew that we were going to be taking our technology and bringing it to a community that was not going to, we would not be greeted as liberators. Oh, thank heavens, finally Microsoft has come to our rescue. No. Under no illusions there. In fact, I knew that we would be treated with hostility and suspicion. Okay? So what was absolutely critical was that we bring our best to the table, right? That we don't create a world where, hey, Windows is a fantastic environment and you can also work on Linux. Like, no, Linux has to be great, has to be a full first-class citizen. So I have this fantastic tool, PowerShell ISE. How do I bring that to Linux? Not going to happen, right? WPF, not going to happen. So we started this new project, Visual Studio Code. That's why we're doing Visual Studio Code, right? So that I can have a fantastic environment there. Now, we talk about Visual Studio Code, but in fact, there's two elements to that. There's Visual Studio Code, and there's the editor languages services. In fact, the language editor services, in fact, a more important story because you can then plug in any editor you want and get a lot of the same capabilities, right? So you can plug in, what are some of the other ones? VI, Sublime, etc. Okay? So again, a lot of work to do a great job on Linux, and we had to improve the native pipelining. Lots of details, but lots of work that had to be done here to do a first-class job on Linux. I mentioned to you the Visual Studio Code and the open editor services. One of the things I'm most proud about this, again, hats off to David, wherever he is, David Wilson, where he is, there's David, is this project has started from the beginning with a community contributor as a maintainer, right? So David can check in code, somebody from the community can check in code, right? Right now with PowerShell, for the most part, community members can suggest code changes, and then a PowerShell team member has to be the one to commit them and sign off on them. That will change over time as members of the community become experts on the PowerShell code base. You can't really have a maintainer that's not an expert in the code base. Because we're closed source, nobody in the community is an expert at the code base. With Visual Studio Code, we're writing that from scratch. So Keith Hill is as much an expert as David is, and they're in the same league, so he's a community contributor as well. One change on that, PowerShell now does have a community maintainer, so someone from the community has the rights to check in code. Unfortunately, that's because one of the PowerShell team members decided to go to another company, but he loved PowerShell so much that he's a very active member of the team, but he's a community contributor. So again, we want to be very open about this. So the heart of this is that you guys effectively are the drivers and owners of PowerShell going forward. Like really, okay? Now, core PowerShell and Devops. In PowerShell version 5, we recognized that we needed to make some changes to support DevOps better, and we started down that journey. That journey will be continued and completed by core PowerShell. Specifically, that we needed to do a better job, having done this vision of, if you read the Manifesto, I talk about how it is an intentional goal that we have a single tool for the company. Single tool that developers and operators can share to accomplish their tasks. A single tool so that when operators need help, they can get help from developers, and when developers need help, they can get help from operators, right? If you have different tool sets, they can't really work together. So we were DevOps before DevOps was cool, okay? Now, that was the vision, and the reality is that we largely focused in on operators, and then each release, we've gone and made it a little bit more developer friendly. Largely that's been good. One big misstep was when we added the return statement. That was a mistake. But in version 5, we decided that we really need to amp up our investment to be better for developers. So we added classes, right? Classes, fantastic, allow you to develop and implement and subclass full .NET classes, express contracts in terms of interfaces. Classes have a new language mode where you get lexical scoping, not dynamic scoping, and return statements work the way we all wished return statements worked, which is to say the return statement returns for the function, and it is the only thing that gets returned from a function. Right now, if you put a return statement in a function, its value gets returned along with anything else that happened to go out on standard output. And that's a surprise and disappointment to lots of people. So we're fixing that. And we will continue to enhance classes. Classes implementation in version 5 is really scoped to doing a great job at desired state configuration resource providers and for expressing contracts between sort of a general contractor and subcontractor. PowerShell Script Analyzer allows, if you're a developer and you're checking your code into source code control, often you don't want to check your code into that until you've had some tools to analyze the code, make sure it's up to practices. We now support that. I mentioned remote script debugging and desired state resource debugging. We've improved that. It used to be not so good. Now it's much better. Core PowerShell in Azure. Azure is going to be using PowerShell extensively to basically make it easy for everyone to consume as much Azure as they want to. Okay, so I mentioned to you the Cloud Command Console, but additionally that desired state configuration is going to be like the core configuration technology of Azure. And in order to do that, we need to make a number of changes. Okay, so first is that we need to, right now we have the local configuration manager. We really have two different implementation technologies, one for Linux and one for Windows. We need to converge that and have a common implementation. Next is we're going to have multiple local configuration management instances. This is some work Kenneth and the team have been driving. Fantastic thinking. Basically, here's the backstory. They said, oh, we need LCMs. And I said, abso-effing-lutely not. Like NFW, no, 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 no. Until you can convince me that we can do it and not screw it up. This is an area that's really fraught with danger, right? I've been doing management for over 35 years, and this is a problem that has plagued people, and the industry's been getting it wrong over and over and over again. And I just said, we will not get this wrong. I won't let you do this. I won't let you get it wrong. Anyway, so for quite a while, he said, well, what about this? No, that won't work. What about this? Won't work. It was a couple months ago, Kenneth comes to me and says, I think we should do it. I said, which part of NFW was confusing you? If you're not familiar with NFW, the first word's no and the last word is way. No F way. Anyway, so he said, well, I said, okay, but tell me, how would you do it? And he laid it all out. Look, here are the tasks, and here's where we need many, and here's where we need one, and he just nailed it. Beautiful thinking. It's like, yes, go, go, go. And so that's going to be a thing of beauty. And by the way, what it does, are we going to talk about that? Yeah. Oh, we're going to talk about that. So Kenneth, good. little bit. And we also, one of the benefits of having multiple LCMs is you can have multiple implementations. So we are going to be generating a native code LCM that is super, super lightweight, sort of our bootstrap LCM that can be used everywhere, okay? And then we'll also make LCM a library, so applications can participate in this, and they can take LCM and put it into their applications. So again, these are lots of really hard things that you wouldn't do unless you were trying to achieve this new mission. So, is PowerShell done? And the answer is no, not by a long shot. We're transforming from Windows, we're focusing in on cross-platform to manage the entire estate. Going from a platform focus to more of a solutions focus. We're going to solve desired state configuration. We're going to solve this problem, etc. And in doing so, we'll modify the platform to support that. We're shifting from a server focus to a focus in on applications, services, clouds. These are all very big changes. But when we're done, what we'll do is we'll have given you a tool where you can manage from any client you want. Anybody got friends that like Macintoshes? Yeah, of course, lots of people. They're all over the place, right? Those people have not been able to use PowerShell. Now they will, okay? And you'll be able to manage. Anybody have Linux in their environments? Yeah, that's very popular, okay? So you'll be able to have a common tool to manage from any client, manage any server. You can manage your stuff running in AWS, in Azure, in Google Public Cloud, or if you want to be on-premise and you want to use VMware or Hyper-V or any storage stack, any networking stack. One tool to manage all of that. So the question is, boy, talked about these transformative changes, talked about how hard they were, talked about how there were a bunch of features and functions that we could have just added to Windows PowerShell and be happy, but instead we invested in really kind of hard grunt work. I'll tell you, there's no glory going from one build system to another. Nobody's like, yay, you know, look how there are no talks on that, for instance, right? Nobody talks about how, hey, here's the new way we do a test, how we converted all of our tests from one test system to another. That was really hard work that there was not a lot of glory in it. So the question is, why did we do that? Right? Why did we choose to make this transformative change? And the answer is really quite simple. We did that because we want to be the tool to support your transformative change. It's not about us. It's not about our technology. It's about you and the challenges you have. And we're embarking on this transformative change because when we talk to our customers, we see that they have these transformative changes that they need to make, and we can support that. Everybody in the room is already either done this or in the process of making this transformative change, going from Windows GUIs to automation. Those of you that have done that have prospered. Has anybody here have had their career improved because of the use of PowerShell? Yeah, most everyone. I tell you, it's my favorite part of conferences and talks when people come up and tell me their stories. People tell me their stories about how they became a hero and saved their company a lot of money, how they became a hero and they got promoted, or they got raises, or they left their job and doubled, and in some cases, a number of cases, people told me about how they have tripled their salary. That's just crazy. I think they obviously weren't being paid much to begin with. But literally, these people just tripled their salary, right? People tell me about how they've doubled their business, increased their billing rates, et cetera. Lots of people have prospered because of these transitions. And here's the point I want to make really pointy. When there are these transformations, basically there are new winners and there are new losers. And the winners are the ones that can embrace that transformation with gusto and ride it and drive business success because of the transformation. And the losers are the ones that decide, hey, that's really hard work. I'd rather have a great work-life balance. I'd rather spend my nights and weekends with my family. That's great. They have a great life. But they are not the new winners through these transformations, okay? Transforms are the ones that lean in and drive and lead through the transformation. So there's a number of these. The management of silos to the management of the entire estate is a transformative change, right? It is very expensive to have people focused in on a silo management task. It reduces your agility, etc. People want to be able to manage everything. People want to go from this traditional IT to a Devops model where your developer teams and your operating teams are working together to solve problems together. Give me one more minute. And to go from on-premises to the cloud. So basically, it's about helping you succeed with your transformative changes. So basically, being uncomfortable, that's the new norm. Get used to being uncomfortable. When you have problems, go back to first principles, adopt a growth mindset, have the courage and confidence of your plan, and things will go bad, tough it out. You know, don't let bad data, adverse effects stand in the fact of your good decisions. So in summary, PowerShell is all about making you successful. It's currently widely used throughout the industry. You made a good bet to invest in PowerShell, but we are going to transform to enable and empower you to solve bigger and harder problems and to help you drive these transformational changes through your company so that you can be the hero and you can be the ones that get rewarded. That's it.
Great. Thanks. Thank you so much.